Hi, my name is Dan Hettinger from Living Web Farms. I'm the biochar facility manager, among other things these days. And I want to spend the next few hours talking about some of the work that I've been doing these past few years at home. So maybe a little more arts and crafts content than you're used to seeing on our channel, but hopefully we get something out of it tonight. So this is going to be a bit of a marathon. We're going to try to do this in about 2 hours, and let's just have some fun with it, okay? Taylor, we got this window here blocking the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Keep your mouse over there?
I think that's on your...
All right.
Just a second.
Keep going, I got it.
Okay. So, yeah, again, my name's Dan, Living Web Farms. Arts and crafts night here. I want to start off by saying I'm very much an amateur painter. Hardly could call myself an artist at all. Not just being humble here, that's the truth. I'm not going to present myself as some sort of an expert. What I want to do here tonight is show some of this work that I've done, some of the experiments, and of course some failures. The point here is to hopefully inspire others to join in and hopefully make a lifetime of opportunity honing this craft. That's what I would like to do. What I would like for you is to become inspired, at least to consider, as maybe if you are artists right now, to consider making some of your own art materials if you're not doing so already. If you're a gardener, or if you're a forager, or you're just a naturalist, or you're a child and you want to walk in the woods and see the woods differently, then hopefully I can help you there too. What's pictured here on the screen now is my first attempt at really trying to make lasting art from materials sourced either at Living Web Farms or very close to my own property. A lot of this was on my property. Look at this wave pattern, this up and down. For me, this painting has come to represent this sort of inward and outward contemplation followed by action, followed by contemplation, followed by action, followed by contemplation. This is a new way of thinking for me. This kind of quiet painting has really helped me with that. What we're looking at here is a wide range of materials. We've got eggshells, we've got indigo pigment, we've got wood ash in there, there's brick, there's hide glue made from rabbit skins, there's calcined eggshells as a gesso, there's egg tempera painted on wood tiles. Those wood tiles are fixed with casein glue, and even those wood tiles are cut from sawmill waste. And I don't really mean to start off talking about myself so much here, but I do want to share a little bit more about my approach to really all the work I do, reflecting on these common themes inspired by nature-based systems of specifically waste transformation. So you see biochar production, growing mushrooms, raising black soldier flies, red worms. To me, these are at heart these optimized waste transformation systems that occur in nature. And I want to use these perfect systems to inspire my art. And think about this when we talk about using spoiled milk, or using eggs, or scraps of animal hides as binders for our paint. Also inspired here, I hope my son is watching right now. He'd be pretty embarrassed. Also inspired by this idea of reclaimed knowledge that's being lost to modernity. Biochar, again, playing a pivotal role there. Think about this as we talk about sourcing pigment from these purpose-grown plants that have been cultivated for thousands of years, specifically for the purpose of obtaining pigment. A few years ago, I'm on a camping trip with my son. This is one of our favorite spots near Avery County. And the two of us were sitting around this fire, and we just sort of randomly, kind of bored, just started scraping stones together. And after 10 minutes or so, we probably identified 4 or 5 different colored pigments, wildly different colors, ranging from blue, green, to white, to yellows and reds. And we just took those those stones, and we spent some time kind of wandering around this exposed granite face here, just scratching the granite with stones. And that's one of those moments in my life where I felt like I was doing something very ancient, like I'm part of a group of people that have been on this planet for a very long time. And that was a special feeling, like having gained some knowledge of, say, entomology, for example, or foraging for medicine. I hope to get a point across that foraging for art supplies and doing purpose-grown art supplies is just a new way to experience humanity and engage with the natural environment. Okay. Talking about foraging for art supplies, let's kick it off with black walnut ink. This is a fun one. Easy. What you do if you want to make black walnut ink at home, collect walnuts, cover them with water. They could be green walnuts, they could be brown, they could be fading completely here, like this really dark brown one. Just take those walnuts and cover them with water. You could simmer on a pot for a few hours, or you could just let it ferment. I just let it ferment. It's great. Go in there with some gloves, peel off your husk, and just squeeze it out. Strain the solids. Take that liquid that's been strained and just slowly boil it down. I mentioned here that you can add iron to darken. That's just adding, say, steel wool. You could add steel wool in at the boiling process. You could do iron filings, maybe if you have a bandsaw like we do in our shop. That's optional. Add a little bit of rubbing alcohol if you want. And it should be well preserved if you do that. I want to show you real quick. This is some black walnut ink that I probably made. Look, there's fruit flies in it. That I probably made 3 years ago. And I was showing Taylor here earlier. It has a wonderful smell.
Hold it up to that camera.
Yeah. You guys see that? Kind of pretty, I don't know if you get a sense. It's still pretty watery, but maybe you get a sense of the viscosity there. Black walnut ink is pretty resilient stuff, but it's not as resilient as another ink that you can make from found materials. This little red berry looking thing is not a berry. That is what we call an oak gall. And that oak gall is sitting on an oak sapling that's probably 10 feet, 20 feet out my front door. And what's neat about these are that they're extremely high in tannins, maybe 80, 90% tannins. So when crushed and made into a powder, you can make a very similar ink to the one I just described with the black walnuts. That ink, oak gall and iron ink, is what they actually wrote the Declaration of Independence with. So a very common ink from that era for hundreds of years. Many important documents have been written on oak gall and iron ink. It's a very light, fast, and lasting ink. Play around with it. I think you'll be happy. That said, I have not done oak gall and iron ink. I'm slowly collecting these oak galls as I find them. Pretty slow process. I want to give a little shout out to 2 of my favorite YouTube channels. Robert Murray Smith, a prolific DIY technology education videos. This guy is probably, I'm sure you've heard, the most interesting man in the world. He's the actual most interesting man in the world. This guy knows everything. And a little more popular probably in the YouTube arena is Townsend's. They do American colonial history. Both of them have a great series on making oak gall ink. Townsend's, just like the last name, Townsend's. They do great colonial history stuff. Fantastic, a lot of fun. A lot of cooking stuff, which I'm sure most of our Living Web listeners would find interesting. All right, let's come back to present day. quite a bit different than the Declaration of Independence here, but here's some artwork from my daughter's birthday party about a month ago. And we had some fun making black walnut ink, and a lot of little girls on my back porch drawing kitty cats. They're all drawing cats these days the same way. So we got out the ink wells and the paint brushes, and they made ink from black walnuts. That's a little bit of an indigo thing down there on the bottom. That one's my daughter's. And this fun one up here on the top right is black walnuts and pokeberry is how we're getting that brilliant pink magenta color. Brilliant, beautiful color. Unfortunately, pokeberry is not very light fast. This is a plant-based color that is going to fade. It's either going to fade completely or it's going to turn to brown. And I want to show you a little test you can do if you're playing around with pigments at home to test to see how light fast they are. So I wish I had more, the rest of this photo to show you, but imagine, see this dotted line here in the middle? What I've done is I've painted the four stripes there. That's pokeberry, just pokeberry in its own juice. Below that is pokeberry and glair. That's a binder that we'll get to later. Pokeberry and casein. That's a different binder we'll get to later. And this is my walnut ink here, which is basically that walnut juice that's been boiled down a little bit with the alcohol in it. No iron in that. What I did was take this paper and I shaded half of it right down that dotted line. I covered the right side half here, this half, with paper. And then I took that half covered paper and I just taped it with masking tape to a sunny window. And this paper sat in front of a sunny window for about 2 weeks. I pulled the paper down and then removed that masking paper, if that makes sense. This side right here was shaded. This side over here, it's so hard to do this, was not shaded, okay? So direct sunlight, little to no sunlight at all here. You can see the pokeberry with glair is almost faded completely already, just in a matter of weeks. Pokeberry on its own is starting to fade, pokeberry with casein. Both of those being a little bit more dilute are fading fast. Walnut, surprisingly resilient. I think the walnut is going to last for a while. Even walnut itself will fade in time. That's going to be an important concept that we're going to come back to over and over again as we talk about different pigments tonight. This is the book here that I'm done talking about foraging for art supplies because there's already a book about it that does a much better job than I'm ever going to do. I found this book pretty inspiring this spring. I checked it out from the library and spent a lot of time with it. I did the grapevine project. I did the bamboo pen. Maybe you can see that. This is just a little ink pen that you can make from just 1/4-inch OD bamboo. Awesome. It's fun. I learned a lot about earth pigments from him. Check it out from the library. Purchase a copy if you're interested. A lot of really, really good stuff in there. I think that my presentation is going to maybe fill some gaps here. It's going to be a lot of stuff that's not covered in this book. So hopefully between this and that book, you'll be a well-balanced DIY artist. Okay, what we are going to cover here is pigments and binders, specifically those that can be sourced locally, hopefully grown on the farm. Earth pigments, extracting pigments from these purpose-grown plants, specifically indigo, weld, and madder. We're going to do a lot with eggs. Eggs are going to play a pretty central role. We're going to make glair, tempera paint, and I'm going to show you how to make a white pigment from eggshells. There's an easy way and a hard way. I'll show you the hard way. and other animal source binders, specifically casein and hide glue. All right, let's dive into pigments. This picture here shows an assortment, not all of my pigments, but an assortment of some that I've collected. I want to say, yeah, everything in this picture has been collected probably within 500 yards of my home, or purpose grown. The one on the top left is a clay. That's a burnt clay, so that's clay that I've actually roasted at an extremely high temperature. Fairly unremarkable, probably won't do that again, but it is good opaque coverage. And blended with something like the indigo, which is a brilliant blue, I can get these nice sad blue colors. That's wood ash, immediately adjacent to that. Wood ash that's been very finely sifted and actually water graded. I'll tell you how to do that. This is Weld Lake, this brilliant yellow. I actually brought that one in to show off tonight. I don't know if you want to get a good look at that. We'll cover that one later too. Yeah, look at that stuff. Tasty. Immediately next to that, Madderroot Lake. That's actually got quite a bit of lime mixed in with it already, so it's a little more dull than it normally is. Another a stone, an earth pigment there next to that. That one on the far left on the bottom is my eggshell white. That's made from an enormous amount of eggshells that I collected. Clay, right out of my backyard behind that. Charcoal, indigo, bones. That one next to the indigo is actually a crushed, I want to say that's a hip bone, probably of a deer that I found in the woods. And this is a green earth pigment right next to that. I know that doesn't look green. Maybe we'll show you a little bit about what to expect when you were to crush that. Let me actually get it wet. Maybe that can kind of bring out the green that we actually get when that's mixed in with like a tempera binder. That tends to look a little bit more green. So this is just a random stone. This stone I actually found on a hike, a trail run, and I'm the funniest guy. I'm like doing trail runs with carrying stones as I go running down the trail. But I was excited to see one that large because I found one of these on a canoe trip not too long ago, and was ecstatic to see the green color that I obtained from it. This would have been not unlike the color that my son and I were fooling around with that day on the granite sheet in Avery County. Last one is crushed red brick. You can't see that very well, but we're going to go right into that now. In a minute. First, let's talk about what artists mean when they talk about earth pigments. These conventional earth pigments are clays and stones, naturally occurring. They are named ochre, sienna, and umber. I know sienna is named after a town or a village in Italy. I imagine ochre and umber are named after places as well. These earth pigments are incredibly lightfast and very durable. So durable that they stuck around for 30,000 years. These are the pigments from prehistoric cave paintings, probably mixed with some sort of an animal-sourced binder. Eggs, maybe. Possibly some sort of a hide glue. Possibly. I don't know that for a fact. Most common earth pigments now are actually synthetic, made from petroleum. This guy here, maybe you recognize him. This is Rembrandt, a Dutch painter of the 17th century. He's an example of a painter who used lots and lots and lots of earth pigments. You can see all this ranging beautiful reds and oranges and yellows, browns. A lot of that would have come from these earth pigments, ochre, sienna, or umber.
Okay. Okay.
Good. Normally I wouldn't well, I hope these guys don't mind the mention here coming from such a amateur. But hopefully they receive it well if anybody sees this. But normally I wouldn't try to endorse a particular product, certainly one that I haven't tried. I have not seen this in person, but I was pretty excited to learn about this. These are pigments sourced from the Appalachian Mountains of Ohio, where this company has come in and are cleaning up the drainage from the acid mine runoff. You know, these really dark iron-colored seeps from out of old underground mines. And they've taken these colors and basically taken that polluted water and cleaned it and made pigments along the way. I just think that's such a fascinating thing. Wanted to share that before we moved on. Okay, I told you I'd talk about my red brick. That red brick came out of the creek that's not 500 yards from my home. It's an old brick. It's got a cool story, I'm sure. I think that brick is probably 100 years old at least. Washed into the creek from an old, who knows what, upstream. Here's how I go about processing earth pigment at home. Take your brick or your stone or your clays. You know, if you've got a soft stone like the green one that I showed you, this would be the same process. If you've got really any kind of a bright colored stone that when you're down at the creek and you rub two stones together and one sheds off a pigment and you like that color, take that rock home and smash it up in your granite mortar and pestle. I did pre-break that brick out in the driveway, just kind of banged on it with the hammer a little bit, got it into smaller bits, and then just started crushing here in the mortar and pestle. You see about that consistency I got there? It's getting pretty fine. And you might be tempted to say, okay, I'm done, but I promise you're not ready to paint with that yet. I'll show you this process of water grading here so that you can get very fine pigment particles directly out of that conglomerate of sizes. What I've done here is I take a few tablespoons of pigment or of this crushed brick or crushed stone, and I add it to this mason jar on the right, and then I've got another mason jar almost full of clean water on the left side. What I'll do is add that water to the pigment, and now I've got this swirly kind of chocolate milk looking water. I'll take a spoon in there and I'll get in there and just stir it up and make sure that everything's fully wetted. And then what I'll do, this is really important, and I tried to take a video of this, it just didn't work out well enough. I'll take a spoon in there and I'll swirl it up when it's all mixed together. And then I'll wait about maybe 3 to 5 seconds. So 1, 2, 3, 4, while that water is swirling around. And then I'll take that water and then I'll gently take it and pour one jar, the chocolate milk water, slowly pour it into the empty jar. And what I'm trying to do when I pour is be very careful to leave the heaviest particles behind. The stuff that's going to settle is the heaviest, largest particles. That's the stuff that I want to throw back into the mortar and pestle and grind further. What's suspended in the water, this swirly chocolate milk water, what's suspended there are essentially going to be the particles that are fine enough to be dried and made into pigment to use in my paint. This photo gives me an example of what's left behind after I pour from one jar to the other. So you can see some chunky stuff in there. You might see some sand. You might see other bits of sediment. Sometimes you'll get organic matter that floats on top. Sometimes you'll get stuff that settles. Here's an example of what that, well, let's see. So I'll take that again. I'll take that and add it back to my mortar and pestle. I'll probably do this 3 to 4 times. So even the stuff that I think is clean or fine enough, I'll take that, and again, I'll swirl it with a spoon, count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then take it and just gently pour it into another jar. And I'm just trading clean jars back and forth. And eventually I end up with something that's very fine, no more large particles left, and then I'll just let that jar sit. It may take a couple hours, it may take overnight to settle. Eventually it'll clarify and I can pour off the water, and that's what I'm left behind with. You know, I started with what looks like a lot. It's always going to be a little less than you think, but I promise that pigment is going to go a lot farther than you think when you start making paint with it. That's the fine texture that I'm looking for. That right there is going to be that's going to make a fine color. Remember that painting that I showed you at the very beginning? That's using a lot of this red brick pigment. This would have been a batch that I would have made for that painting. Let's talk a little bit about blacks. We've got earth pigments out of the way, I think. So, let's review this. Earth pigments can be made from clays, stones, bricks, really just anything like that. I would do the same process, this water grading. I just took some wood ash directly out of my wood stove, sifted it, and then I would do this water grading process for that too. I got an awesome gray color from that. You know, this stuff is everywhere, and it's really. I want to speak to how cool I think it is that you can have your own color. You can have, this is the color of my, well, this is the color of a brick that we're looking at here, but I showed you the clay earlier. That's the color of my property. That clay is my home. And, you know, you could go out on your farm, in your pasture, or in your backyard, or in the creek bed, and you can dig down and you can find clay, and you can do this water grading process that I did with clay, and you can have your own unique earth pigment, and you can call it whatever you want to call it, and it can be special to you because it's from your property. I just really love that. One more thing, I thought what was pretty neat, my son and I were on a bike ride and we rode past the baseball field out near Appalachian State University, one of their practice fields, and he saw a giant pile of crushed red brick and recognized it as crushed red brick. And it just occurred to me, how cool is that we could grab a little bit of crushed red brick from the pitcher's mound of your baseball field. And now you've got your own Atlanta Braves pigment. Okay, all right, moving on. This is just too cool. I had to show it. You guys know, if you've watched any of our videos, that we're crazy about charcoal, biochar here. I certainly am. I wanted to show bone black. And I'm not going to crush these because they're so cool, but these are some sheep that we raised and slaughtered here on the property. And I kept the skulls, and we dried them out and charred them. And when you take a bones and you put them into a retort system like ours, that's like a nice slow cook without oxygen, they transform into these beautiful, they maintain their shape if they go in dry enough, and maintain the bone shape, but essentially turn to carbon and phosphorus and calcium. Bone black was a popular pigment. It still is. You can still purchase bone black pigment in the art supply stores. Another black charcoal pigment is from vines. I was just poking around in the back room a little bit here, and I did find this. This is an example of vine charcoal. That's exactly what this is. So that is maybe a wild grapevine that's been through the same process that we would do to make biochar, heated in the absence of oxygen. Okay? It just looks like a little black stick. And carbon black. I'll show you how I've kind of experimented with carbon black a little bit lately, or maybe well known as lamp black. Here's a little thing that I kind of rigged up to make little artisan charcoals in my wood stove at home. It's basically a stainless steel pipe with a little door here on one side, and it's just capped on the other side, and then there's a little hole to vent gases. That vent is extremely important, but it doesn't need to be this complicated. If you want to do what I did and make charcoal vine pencils at home, then just take your vines and you can put them in a steel can and try to cap it, and just make sure that steel can has at least like a pinhole to vent the gases as you make it. I don't want to get into the details of doing that. We talk so much about biochar. You can find that in plenty of other places on our channel. But this is a nice resilient, chunky, I think that's got to be close to 1/4 inch stainless steel pipe. That thing will be around forever. But I've experimented with making charcoal pencils from grapevines off of my own Concord grapes at home. I don't know. I was a little disappointed with my process, but I only tried a few times. Mine certainly aren't this narrow. Mine were huge, and maybe that's the problem. Lamp black is something I just tried a few days ago using my welding torches. I set my torch, and there's a lot of different ways. Historically, lamp black would have been used just like on an oil lamp, and you would collect the soot from around an oil lamp. And there's ways that you can produce soot. And this is what I'm going to show you here using a reducing flame, or basically a flame with no oxygen or limited oxygen. And you've got a lot of excess fuel that becomes soot when you take that flame and pass it across maybe a metal pan or something. And that's all lamp black is. It's soot. In my case, I got a nice little source of this flaky acetylene soot, kind of a strange fossil fuel kind of sweet smell here. No doubt this is gross stuff. I'm not outright recommending that you do this, but it was a fun experiment. I'm going to show you a little bit later what I've been doing with it. This was just produced in just a few minutes. This is a lot of pigment. This pigment will go a very long way. It's a very fine, ultra fine pigment. No grinding involved here, so it's nice. Yeah, I took my acetylene torch with no oxygen again, and I just sort of just swept across a steel plate. And after just a few minutes, I scraped it off with the paint scraper and was able to collect this. That's that like I said, that's going to make a lot of paint or a lot of ink. Lamp black is, maybe you've heard of India ink. Lamp black is the pigment that makes India ink so black. All right, rapid fire here. This is a deep dive, so I'm going to take a sip of my tea before I dive into this. This is pretty fun, pretty weird. I don't know if I would outright recommend that you do this, but I had too much fun with it. I have to show off a little bit. Eggshell white. What you're looking at in those jars, that's basically 2 half-gallon jars. I don't know, maybe 1 1/4 gallons of crushed eggshells. That's probably 50 to 75 dozen eggs. I weighed them and tried to estimate at a time. I don't remember what that was though. But it's about 1.5 years worth of eggs in our house. What I do with these eggs, I essentially take them and set them aside after we crack them, and then whenever we run the oven or the toaster oven or something, I'll just put them on a tray and just cook them in the oven just to sort of disinfect them. I would never run the oven specifically to do that, but if I'm running it anyway, I'll toss these in. Notice these are brown eggshells. if you were to collect white eggshells, and brown too, it just wouldn't be as white of a pigment when you're done. But if you collect these eggshells and you remove the membrane from the eggshells, you guys, you've done it. When you crack an egg, you see it's kind of held together by a little, almost like plastic-like liner on the inside. Just take that and kind of peel it away gently, and then set your eggshell aside. And eventually you can get enough, and you can just crush it in a mortar and pestle. And if you need to, you can water grade it just like I did, like I showed you already. If you do that, you're going to end up with something that's essentially calcium carbonate. It's essentially chalk. And chalk and calcium carbonate have a very long history in art materials. They're all over the place in art as a filler, as a whiting material, just in maybe not even an exposed pigment, but just sort of when making gesso, sort of like a primer, you can add the calcium carbonate chalk at that point. You can think of that as a primer for say like canvas or wood panels. I told you I was going to tell you about the hard way. Here's the hard way. I took all of these shells and I saved them for a year and a half, and I sent them through my kiln at the farm, at our shop. And I want to go into the lime cycle a little bit here. Show you what I did when I sent these through the kiln. Okay, limestone eggshells, basically the same thing, calcium carbonate there at the top. Heated, following this circle around clockwise. When limestone is heated, and it's hot heated, it's not just in your oven at 400 degrees, it's very hot, something like 1600 degrees Fahrenheit. So this takes a heavy duty kiln. Basically what you're doing is driving off that CO2, and that's going off as gas. That's carbon dioxide going out into the atmosphere. What you're left over with is calcium oxide, known as quicklime, or in the store you can buy it as pickling lime. When you add water to that, you get slake lime, so that's calcium hydroxide. And then if that slake lime, this is what happens when you make concrete. You're taking slake lime, which is an ingredient in your cement, and then you're adding sand and stone of some kind. And then when the water is added, that becomes slake lime, and then it, as it cures, it pulls in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and essentially becomes limestone again. So what I've done when I heated my eggshells was essentially make calcium oxide. Here's a picture of the furnace part of my kiln. This process is called calcining. The calcining is basically just cooking until decomposition, but below melting temperature. So I'm not cooking, it's not hot enough to melt this or fuse it into glass or anything, but it is enough to decompose, basically drive off that carbonate. 1652 was my target temperature this day. I don't know if you can see, I've got the flame, you can't see in this photo, it's too obscure, but I've got flames shooting into my furnace here, and then this here is my crushed eggshells, kind of off on the side, separated by a sheet of ceramic board. This was a mistake to crush the eggs before. If anybody ever wants to do this, leave your eggs whole and just kind of toss them in one by one, and they flare off immediately. In this case, I found that I had to stir it. And you know, in the modern rotary kilns where they actually make concrete or cement, they're constantly agitating as they heat. It's not nearly as wasteful or cumbersome as my process here. Real quick shout out to my oil burning apparatus here. This is something we made a few years ago. The biochar crew was really instrumental in this. Specifically, let's give a shout out to Johnny, Evan, thank you guys. Chris, thanks a lot. Eli. Kind of a team project built over a few years, but this is neat. This actually burns the oils and tars collected off of our biochar system. So this is a whole nother workshop here that we don't have time to talk about, but uh, essentially a carbon negative liquid fuel. I wrote about this extensively on our blog, and send me an email if you want to know anything else about it. I'd love to share. This is what our eggshells look like after they've been calcined. So very, very white now. This is incredibly dangerous to inhale, so I can't crush this in a normal mortar and pestle. Instead, I'm using my, I kind of stole this from my niece, and a little rock tumbler, and I added some BBs that I got from the hardware store. So I've got my calcium oxide flakes and some BBs in there, and I'm just kind of grinding this with a rock tumbler. And I ended up with some very fine powder, almost half a gallon of powder. And I've acquired quite a bit more since the first time I did this. I want to show you something that I think is pretty unique. I don't know anybody that's ever done this, but okay, so I made these out of eggshells. And I bought a little silicone egg-shaped mold and made my own egg made from eggs. And my daughter got a kick out of that. We did that on the porch. We mixed up our own cement and poured it into the mold. And that's a picture of my daughter holding her egg. And she went on to paint that herself. It's still sitting on my mantle. And what's interesting is that egg has actually gotten harder over time. It's absolutely pulling in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and reverting back to essentially limestone, calcium carbonate. Well, maybe a more practical use for this is my gesso. This is eggshell lime, and this is casein glue. So casein, we'll talk about that later, but this is my eggshell lime. And I say eggshell lime, but it's basically at this point it's probably mostly like slake lime, and then I'll paint it on, and I think it cures, and then in which case I can come in there and sort of sand it and maybe give it a second coat. This is my DIY primer. This does two things. It kind of stabilizes the moisture in the wood. So if I was to paint this panel all around, it won't bow as it absorbs moisture quite as much. It won't change shape. It's also going to fill in little pits and holes. It's also going to give me a sort of a surface for my paint to bite to. It's essentially it's primer. Just when you're making this, that's how I've come to understand it. Yeah, eggshell carbonate and calcium carbonate and casein glue. And this is what I've done with that one in particular. This showcases some of those earth pigments that I've been talking about. Let's see, this dark color, this dark tan brown, that's the clay from my backyard. That's my home pigment. Directly below that is indigo with some eggshell mixed in. That indigo is so dark, it's almost black. I mean, it's very, very dark blue. Directly below that is that green stone that I told you I carried out of the woods on my trail run. Adjacent to the right of that dark green one is the dark green mixed with lime. Probably overshot the lime a little bit. It really turned a little gray there. That color is really nice in person. It doesn't show up here on the photo. Directly above that is the indigo with more lime, probably about 50-50. Directly above that is that bone, that crushed bone pigment that I was telling you about. So again, that bone is, I think, a hip bone from a deer found in the woods, probably 100 yards from my house. So save for the plywood here, nearly everything involved is extremely local. This is a hyper-local painting, and I'm very proud of it. It sits on my bookshelf at home. Finished here, this is all casein binder, so this is milk paint, we'll talk about later. Finished with a transparent glaze of glair. Glair is an egg-based binder that we'll talk about later too. So let's take maybe a 2-minute break and we'll pick up talking about homegrown pigments. Yeah, that's it right there.
All right. All right, we're on.
Okay, welcome back. Thanks for staying with us here. Let's talk about some plant source pigments. We talked about earth pigments, we talked about eggs for white, and we talked about charcoals for blacks. So let's get into these brilliant primary colors now. Well, that's some brilliant colors on the screen there. Anthocyanins are a brilliant color, unfortunately, very much not lightfast. Anthocyanins can be extracted from a variety of plants, mostly, let's say, red cabbage, beets, blueberries, elderberries, pokeberry. Those would have been anthocyanins. That's a range of compounds, but red cabbage is what we're looking at right here. And this is kind of a famous photo of maybe a famous common science project for, I don't know, middle schoolers, maybe high schoolers. But you can take red cabbage juice, and it makes a fine pH indicator. And that's what we're looking at here. This purple is probably pH 7. This would be a little bit more acidic to the left there. And then these are measuring different ranges of alkalinity there, with that yellow probably being close to 12, pH of 12. Anthocyanins are kind of, it's tragic because they're so beautiful and they're so easy to find. Again, it's all of the vegetables and berries that you're growing in your garden or the weeds that pop up. Unfortunately, flowers and berries and vegetables typically don't make very good light-fast pigments. One thing that I did do with some beet juice at home and red cabbage juice was sort of for an art adjacent project, was making icing for decorating cookies at Christmas time. That's just an old family tradition that we have. And my family gets way into it. And last year we made icing from plant pigments, beets, blueberries, red cabbage. And it's cool because you can shift the color with pH. I can add a tiny bit of baking soda or lemon juice, and we can get basically the entire range of colors. Plant-based food colorings. It's pretty neat. Anyway, this is great for kids' art, like I showed. Not art needs to last forever. Just be responsible. Don't make a painting with this and then sell it as a painting that's supposed to last. They do make pretty good pH strips, just to say that again. This is blueberries and red cabbage. Blueberries tend to be a little more precise on the acidic side. And again, in that photo, you can see if that purple is 7 there, you can see we've got quite a bit of range for indicating the alkaline side. That kind of pinkish magenta color is red cabbage. So what I've done here, I just extract the juice. I boil down the red cabbage a little bit and concentrate the juice. And I just used, this is watercolor paper, but you can even use coffee filters or something like that. Just a way to absorb the pigment and then just use that like you would a regular pH strip. So there you go, some homegrown laboratory stuff there. All right, let's dive in. Let's talk about indigo. Maybe my favorite plant, Japanese indigo. I'm in love with it. Indigo is this blue pigment right here by my head. Indigo comes from a glucoside called indican. And indican is found in the leaves of many different indican-bearing plants across many different plant families. Indigofera tinctoria, or true indigo, is probably our commercially cultivated legume. Persicaria tinctoria is Japanese indigo. That's what I'm going to talk about tonight. That's what I've been growing at home. Woad is a indican-bearing brassica, native to, I think, the Caucasus or in Europe. Each of these three plant pigments that I'm going to cover tonight are mostly considered dyes. So these indigo in particular was the dye of blue jeans. So they're the reason jeans are blue. Blue jeans, if you think about it, they fade, but they don't fade as aggressively in the light. Indigo or blue jeans are fading from abrasion, from actually rubbing little fibers, cotton fibers rubbing against each other, and the indigo pigment actually just kind of abrades off. These three pigments, again, indigo, madder, and weld, are lightfast to a degree. They are among the most lightfast pigments known to man. And indigo specifically is probably the most lightfast of the three I'm going to talk about. This is a painting from 1466, the Presentation of Christ in the Temple. Indigo is painted here, and if you look at this blue drapery, and you can kind of see this pink fading here, that is where the indigo has faded over time. Okay, so we know that there's some indigo in that robe. Through special analysis, we know that that was originally painted with indigo. You're going to see that a lot with these plant pigments in high art of the 17th century and prior. You're going to see these plant pigments being used as overglazes and going over a different mineral-based pigment of the same color. I don't know what that blue is originally, but indigo would have been painted on as a glaze to give that blue more depth and life there. Indigo again here on the, this is a great one, called Smell, 1637, a Dutch painting. We're going to talk about a lot of Dutch paintings. They were big on the plant-based pigments. Indigo and lead white on this woman's dress. Now, what's interesting here, you can see the indigo noticeably faded away from the margins of this painting. This painting would have been in a frame that would have shaded around the edge. You can see where the indigo is still vibrant around the edge of this painting where it was shaded in the frame, around by the frame. Indigo tends to survive a little bit longer when covered with certain protective glazes, probably what's going on here. This is an older, 1688. This is a cathedral ceiling in Puebla, Mexico. Notice hardly any fading at all here. That's entirely indigo pigment, I believe. And what's interesting here, there's a unique blend of indigo in a special clay that makes a color they call Maya blue. And there's some interesting chemistry here that we're just now really learning about that somehow prevents this indigo from fading over time. Something I'd absolutely like to experience or experiment with a little bit. Here's a much older Mayan painting. This one is 1,600 years old, also painted with Maya blue. And you can see very little fading there with the blue. An ancient pigment that we have forgotten about. And lots to learn here. All right, the plant. This is my Japanese indigo. This picture was taken just a few days ago. It's going to flower. I'm going to save the seed this year and hopefully do a quite much bigger plot at home next year. I've been growing this plant multiple years now, and I find that it's just a brilliant stopgap plant. It works like buckwheat in terms of a cover crop. It's in the buckwheat family, grows very fast, It can grow, it can probably be 18 inches tall within, from seed, it's going to take about 2 months, but from transplant, it's 18 inches tall within 30 days, maybe 45. And then you can harvest and you can reharvest and reharvest. And if you're on it and you got good conditions, you could probably get up to 4 harvests per season. That would be normal, maybe longer if you're in a warmer climate. So you can get quite a bit of pigment out of a small patch here. It's a fantastic late season pollinator. That's what's going on here. If you could zoom in on that photo, you'd see a lot of bees going around there. It's a frost tender annual. Really enjoys this loamy, rich soil. Loves moist soil. It absolutely adores nitrogen. I talked a lot about it in the Waste Not Urine workshop, about how I used urine to fertilize indigo and had some pretty cool results with that. What I'll do, I'll start it in trays and put it out on 4-inch centers. I don't do rows, I just kind of throw it all in there. Like I said, it'll grow around 18 inches tall, and I'll harvest about 3 inches off the ground. I'll cut it, it'll bifurcate, branch off, and it'll grow even more dense the second time around. Sometimes I'll just maybe pluck off a leader leaf and get it to bifurcate sooner before even my first harvest. Easily propagated with cuttings. And seeds, I've read this and I have experienced this personally, that you want to be saving the seeds every year. You at least need to set a little bit aside to go to flower. Save the seeds because the seed doesn't keep very well. I've had I didn't get any to germinate at all from 2-year-old seed that I saved on my own. Luckily, Greta from here at Living Web was able to help me with some seed that she got, and I was able to pull this together pretty nicely. Here's indigo I was growing last year. This is actually in my urine fertilized hydroponic system that I've been talking a lot about lately. So if you want to learn more about urine hydroponics, I call it anthroponics. But you can read about that on our blog, or you can watch our Waste Not Urine workshop. I think I squeezed that in the end of the video from last year. The indigo absolutely booms in the hydroponic urine system. It's crazy. This is probably, I think I'm harvesting on a 3 or 4 week schedule. So ideally, if I got this going soon enough with warm water, I no doubt that I could get maybe even 5 or 6 harvests in a single season with this. It's great. The extra nitrogen really does help produce more pigment. And that's because we're producing more leaves. So how do we get pigment out of Japanese indigo? Well, there's a handful of different ways to experiment with this, to extract it. I think I'm probably doing the most popular, probably the most easy method here, the water fermentation extraction, where I've taken my plants and 18 inches tall, it snugs nicely here in one of these 4 cubic foot Rubbermaid containers. And I submerged it with water. You can see I took a little bit of fencing there and just kind of folded it in and crammed it down there just to keep the leaves submerged underwater. This is leaves and stems and everything. One important thing that you do want to do is wash any kind of dirt. If you got any dirt in there at all, that will affect the pigment over time. Keep clean leaves and stems submerged underwater. If you have reasonably warm weather, it's going to do this in about 3 days. This picture does not do it justice, but this is an absolutely magical experience, because that water does not look like anything from nature. The common analog is antifreeze. So, that just bizarre look of antifreeze is what this looks like here. And it has a very unique smell. Some people hate it, some people love it. course, I'm a weirdo. I've grown to love it. I think that it is the smell that I think it is that nobody else, I haven't heard anybody else say this, is tempera. It just has a odd, it's just a unique umami kind of low tide thing going on. Now, if you leave it like this for too long, it's going to become very putrid, very nasty stuff. What's happening here, though, talk a little bit about the science. Remember the indican that I was talking about? What happens here is the indican is splitting off into, it's that glucose side. So it's got some glucose involved there that's kind of feeding this fermentation process. And then it has indoxyl, or sorry, indigotin. And, sorry, I've got this wrong. Indoxyl is this blue-green color. What happens here is it becomes in solution when you have a reduced environment. So no oxygen involved here. That indoxyl has gone into solution. So what we can do at this point is take that and strain the solids off, take that water. What I'll normally do is reach in there with some gloves on, or if you don't mind stinking for a day, you can reach in there and just pull it out on your own. That smell will linger, though, I promise. Ask my wife and kids. Ask my son if he's still online commenting, but he'll tell you about the smell. Take that, strain it, and yeah, I'll reach in there and pull the stalks out, and then I'll strain it through just a simple colander before putting it into another container where I'll strain it once again with a t-shirt. And then I'll take that blue-green, I've heard it called mermaid water. I think that's pretty funny. Take your mermaid water, and you're going to add a little bit of an alkali. The most common alkali is that calcium oxide that I was talking about. You can use your eggshell calcium oxide if you want to go my route, or you can buy pickling lime from the store. Lime does two things. It elevates the pH, and it's also a flocculant, so those little pigment particles will bind to the lime and then settle down over time. But first thing you got to do after you add your lime is just aerate it like crazy. You have to introduce air in order for that pigment to go out of solution. There's a number of different ways to do this. Some people take like a paint paddle and put it on a drill. I think that's pretty messy. You know, you can take it and just pour it from one bucket to the other over and over again. That takes a long time. You can just whip it up with anything. You know, in the large scale, you know, plantation days, they would have a big, almost like a kiddie pool, and they just get in there and kick it around with their feet, you know, and stain themselves blue in the process. But here I'm using my compost tea bubbler. This is that, I showed in our biochar inoculation video, just a little bubbler that I made to drop in a 5-gallon bucket. That's working pretty nicely here. So pickling lime goes in at a rate of about 1 tablespoon per gallon. And what I'll do is add lime and aerate, and then just let it sit. And if it doesn't flocculate after maybe overnight, then I'll just add a little bit more lime and stir it in. I might aerate again just to get that lime moving around. And usually after, you know, no more than 2 tablespoons per gallon of water, I can get it to settle out, and that's what's happening here. You can see it just down here at the bottom of my little translucent bin. And I'll siphon that tempera smelling water out of there and combine that wet pigment, and I'll run it through these coffee filters. And all that I'm doing here with these coffee filters is just draining away excess water. And what I'm going to end up with is a thick paste. And that thick paste I can take and store in the fridge. Like I can put that directly in the fridge and use that as pigment, pre-wetted pigment. or I can dry it to powder and store it indefinitely in airtight jars in my cabinet. So right now I've got some paste going in my fridge, and I've got multiple batches of dry pigment powder in my cabinet at home. That thick paste, if you want to use that as pigment, I should mention that that only works in water-based pigments. It's not going to work in your linseed oils or anything like that. If you want to use it in oil mediums, you do need to dry it completely. Okay, that's indigo. Let's talk about Weld. Reseda luteola, hopefully I said that right, is a, it's funny, I've heard everywhere I read about it, somebody has to say that it's weedy. It's a weedy biennial. It's not like your Japanese indigo, and I'll get in trouble for saying this. I don't think it's a very attractive plant. I don't think madder is a very attractive plant either, but to me, that's maybe the magic of it. It's this plant that doesn't reveal its beauty unless you know how to extract it. Weld grows well in alkaline or disturbed land. I read the other day that they used to grow Weld in European colonial or 18th century, 19th century industrial sites because Weld has such a nice aroma. It has a very nice smelling flower, strong smell, and it grows well in those kind of wasteland soils. It does not like that wet, very rich soil. I've grown my Weld. I've only grown this once, and I made a mistake of harvesting the entire plant. I didn't save any seed or anything, but it grew very well in a young bed that I'm doing this ramial wood chip method where I'm double digging soil and adding biochar, and then really only using ramial wood chips to get the violet in compost tea to get things kicking off. And this grew on that infant bed. So this would have been probably the first year that I had done that. That disturbed land, alkaline from the biochar before it had a chance to mellow out. Nice stuff. It's very clear, intense yellow. It's the yellow by which all other yellows are judged. And it is more lightfast than most other plant-based yellows. You can get a yellow dye from a lot of different plants. Millennia of experimentation has proven that Weld is among the most lightfast. That compound is luteolin that's responsible for that yellow, found in all green parts of the plant, leaves, stalks, flowers. Oh, sorry, not flowers, but seeds even. This pigment is so fine, and it tends to be a little on the translucent side. Historically, this would have been used with a bulking agent like chalk, like that calcium carbonate. Weld was used in this most famous painting, The Girl with Pearl Earring, Vermeer from 1665, another Dutch painter. We're going to find all of our pigments in The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Weld was used in the background. This is some sort of a black pigment, I don't know which, overpainted with indigo and Weld blended together to give you that dark forest green there. Okay, so that's an old painting, and we're talking 400 years with some fading, significant fading. No doubt that would have been more green, but it's still there. Again, Weld is among some of the most light-fast yellows, and I did that shading experiment again that I showed you from early on, where I shaded half of a strip of paint and put it in my sunny window. You're looking at Weld with a really kind of this is mixed in with my eggshell lime, and it's sort of a rough paint. I wish I'd have done a better job with that, but you can tell up top this is Osage orange lake made in the same way that I made the Weld lake. And the Osage orange has faded significantly over just a few weeks in the sun. Osage orange is another one of those common dyer plants. It's using the heartwood of the Osage orange tree. Brilliant, beautiful, beautiful bright yellow, marigold, gold yellow. Unfortunately, not as resilient as a pigment here. Maybe you heard me say lake pigments. Well, what are lake pigments? Maybe when you were young, like I was, and you looked at the side of a crayon and it said red lake or blue lake, and you didn't know what that meant. Why is a lake red? That's what I thought. A lake is an organic dye, like our indigo or our Weld, or like that Osage orange dye that I made, that has been bound to and precipitated with a metallic salt. That predominantly we're talking about alum or potassium aluminum sulfate. That's the common metallic salt. This is a salt that's non-reactive and it's not going to affect the color of the pigment or anything, but it's just, it exists there for the dye to stick to it and then fall out of solution. That's how I think of lake pigments. Maybe a proper chemist could explain that better. I'm sure they could. Here's our Weld Lake process. Take note. Got 100 grams of dry plant material. I'm going to add 22 grams of potash to 2.5 liters of water. And I'm going to add that dry plant material to the water, combine and simmer for 30 minutes. And then I'm going to filter it, remove the solids. I usually let it cool. I don't know if that's really necessary. And then I'll transfer it to a much larger dedicated pot. I'm talking about a 5 or even 10-gallon stainless steel pot. I just got real lucky and found a bunch of those in the junkyard, scrapyard here in town. So I keep those as dedicated dye pots. And then you add 44 grams of alum to that dye. And you stir gently, and let it settle over time. And it's going to settle out, and you can drain off the supernatant just like you would the indigo that I've already showed you. I'll do the same process where I'll take that paste and transfer it to my filter paper. One thing that we have to do now here that we're using all this excess salts is take your pigment, now that you've got a paste like we left off with the indigo, and you need to rinse it. You need to actually take that pigment and pour clean water, rainwater, or distilled water if you need to, and rinse out those excess salts. That'll be a problem later if you leave those salts behind. So let me show you some photos of that process. Here's my plants. Here's my Weld plants. Again, that's an easy plant to just, I don't know, you hire the guy to come cut your grass. He's probably going to weed eat that one. So, put a fence around it if you want to keep it. It's an easy one. Now you see why I say it's weedy. These are the tops. These are the flower buds getting ready to open up. Seeds, some seeds in there, not many, and the stalks, and some leaves. And this here, I did want to show off a little bit here because this workshop is just so multidisciplinary that I wanted to show off. This is my potassium carbonate or potash that I sourced from wood ashes. This is a few years ago. I wrote about this extensively on our Waste Not Wood Ash blog. I did talk a little bit about this during our workshop, but I don't think I got this far. This is very clean potash. We've actually, and I wrote about this again on the blog, but we actually did some cooking with this as a baking powder substitute. So I've got my own potash that I've sourced from my wood ashes here. Of course, you don't have to be as extreme as I am. You can source potash, online, just like anything else. Add my potash to my plant and cover it with water. Stir gently. Now I've got this brilliant kind of orange, pretty rich color. That picture does not do it justice. That color is alive, I promise. It's dimensional. This is a funny thing that happens when you add the alum, and this is why I say stir gently and transfer to a larger pot. because it is going to foam like crazy. And I don't know if you've smelled alum. It's unique. It's a metallic smell. It's a weird smell. You want to do this outside. It's a smell. I've grown accustomed to a lot of weird smells, but this is one that still kind of gets to me. Stir gently, and as you stir, it's going to react. The alum's going to react to that potash in there, and it's going to foam and bubble just like baking soda and vinegar. And you'll get this this foam that eventually will die off. And this is what I was left behind with when that settled out. This is after kind of stirring the foam and breaking everything up. Poured it into these glass jars to settle. And eventually it settled down just like that picture I showed you of the indigo. It clarifies on top. It may take a few days to settle. It's possible. Don't go willy-nilly adding extra alum or anything if it's not settling. Just take your time. Gently pour off and take your paste. And here I am again taking my paste and filtering it through coffee filters to remove excess water. One thing you want to be really careful here is, just to preserve the integrity of the pigment, do not sun dry this, but take it and spread it out maybe on a thin baking sheet and just let it air dry. All right, here's another painting that I've made. Let me tell you too, before we go farther, I did. The first time that I've done this, I've actually only done Weld once. Again, I told you I pulled out the whole plant, didn't save seed, was not able to get starts going this season. Hopefully I'll track down some new seed for next year. But I did not rinse the soluble salts, and I think that's why I had such a hard time grinding this pigment later on. It just had salt crystals in there that were not grinding as easily. And ultimately, I had to use a coffee grinder to get this ground fine enough. Anyway, so rinse those soluble salts. It's important. Here's a painting that I've made with Weld. You can see my yellow. And indigo, you can see my green where the Weld and indigo comes together. You can see my indigo with eggshell lime, that lighter blue. And you can see I'm starting to introduce madder lake here as well. Madder being this red color that I've got. That's actually madder painted over the red brick. And then that's madder painted over a kind of a little bit of Weld in there, but not much. It was what I had left at the time. And the closest to yellow that I've been able to find is an earth pigment in my area, making that orange color. So these are my three primary colors mixed to give me my secondary colors. No doubt, no question in my mind, if I took my clean madder and my clean Weld, I would have and blended those two together, I would have a perfect orange. These really are very pure colors, very, very bold. This is that same painting. This is inside. This is hanging up in my kitchen with artificial lighting. This is outside, taken on kind of a bright cloudy day if you have those. You can see that purple kind of stands out a little bit better there. Of course, again, the pictures never do it justice, but you can kind of see the textures I've got going on here. No doubt a more experienced painter could get that on a little bit more evenly than I did. But I like it. I like how it came out. I think it looks like stained glass in the right light. Okay. Madder Lake. This is a very ancient pigment. All of these are ancient pigments, but Madder Lake is very ancient. It was cloth dyed. Again, these are dyes. Madder, Weld, indigo are common as dyes, and then we make lake pigments out of them. Cloth dyed with madder was found in King Tut's tomb. Thought that was pretty fascinating. Little used as a paint pigment until the Dutch painters came around. Well, that's not entirely true. It was used as a as a pigment in illuminated manuscripts. So these are the, if you're not familiar, the medieval books with the illustrations in the margins. Really brilliantly illustrated drawings. Madder root lake would have been found as a red pigment in those manuscripts. Was used frequently by the Dutch painters that we've talked about. Very brilliant red. Again, like Weld, tends to be more transparent and was used in glazing applications. Okay, here's the girl with the pearl earring again. Take a look at those lips. Those parted lips, so scandalous. Those were touched up with madder. I don't know that that's entirely madder, but they have found madder on those lips. They've also found madder on the drapery of this other painting, The Girl with the Wine Glass from 1660. Both of these are Vermeer, Johannes Vermeer paintings. Oh, that's Madder Lake over Vermilion. Vermilion, I believe, is mercury sulfate. I don't know, mercury something. A brilliant red color at the time, something that's completely out of use now. Madder is this kind of sprawling. I don't know how to describe that plant other than sprawling. One interesting thing about madder is it has these little hooks. So when you rub up against it, it does kind of tend to stick to your arms or your clothing. Rubia tinctorum, sprawling perennial. This plant will die back every year and regrow from the roots. So the top will die down. I'll cover it with leaves. I haven't had any problem with freezing or anything like that. It's basically an established perennial for me. This plant that you're looking at right now is 3 years old. You know, it looks like that every year though. It'll sprawl quite a bit. Popular opinion is that you should trellis it for longer roots, and longer roots are preferred to thicker roots. When you go to harvest this stuff, madder comes entirely from the root. The top has essentially very, very, very little pigment entirely. There are stories about cow's milk or cow's urine, I think, turning red from eating madder tops. But you have to eat an awful lot of madder tops for that to happen. The pigment is concentrated almost entirely in the roots, and you want these thickness of a pencil long roots. Again, popular opinion is that pigment is richer in slightly alkaline soil. Here's the big thing about madder is that you have to be patient. You really want to wait to harvest those roots. It takes a long time for a madder bed to become established. What people will do is have multiple madder beds going at the same time, and they'll say they might have 3 to 5 beds, and they'll harvest on a cycle. Well, they'll harvest one bed after 3 years, and then replant into that bed, and then harvest the adjacent bed the next year, so that you're always getting roots that are at least 3 to 5 years old. This does propagate from the roots. I've only done this once, but I was able to easily propagate by basically leaving some root and then leaving a little bit of top with just a few leaves. And I found that it propagated nicely doing that. I have not attempted yet, but I have read that it does not germinate very well from dry seeds. Here's another sidetrack. I'm kind of showing off tonight. These are some plastic pots that we made at the biochar facility a few years ago. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Eli, for helping out a lot on this project. But we made a large mold, stainless steel mold, and we essentially baked our plastic. This is recycled IBC containers or 55-gallon drums, whatever kind of HDPE we could get a hold of. And we essentially heated it with our biochar retort system and molded these. These are 30 pounds each, so they're very durable, very resilient pots. But what I'm showing you here are the best of the pots. We had plenty of mistakes. And I took those mistaken pots, the ones that maybe the top didn't flesh out as nice as we wanted it to. And I'm growing my madder in those pots at home. If you want to learn more about that process, I absolutely would love to share it with you, but I wrote about it on our blog on farm plastic recycling at livingwebfarms.org. Here's those pots that have been trimmed. They're shorter than what I've showed you there, and I've kind of partially buried them underground. That's madder when I planted it. That is 2.5 years ago now. And immediately to the right, that's madder after. I think that would have been, I don't know, April of this year, probably May of this year. And I went on to use tomato cages just to stake that. This is my madder just a few weeks ago as it's starting to put on seed. These little purple berries here have a nice seed inside. Now, I've heard that it's hard to germinate from dry seed. I assume that you can take these berries and probably stick them in the fridge. Those are the madder roots there. I cheated. I harvested at the beginning of this year with just 2-year-old plants, and predictably I had a fairly low yield. But there's my pencil thin madder roots there, pictured right here. The roots being dirty, what you want to do is just wash them very well, get that dirt completely off. And then while you do that, you might find that you can remove the bark, the outer bark, and look at that brilliant color inside. This picture really shows it here, just how bright those roots are once you get the bark off and you get them cleaned and washed. No doubt we can understand why the ancients understood that madder had a fair amount of magic inside. Madder lake process. This is really similar to Weld with one difference. We're actually going to add the alum first, and then we're going to add the potash later. That's because we want to do this in a slightly acidic environment. So I'm actually going to take 100 grams of dry plant material, 1.5 liters of distilled water, rainwater. Adjust that pH down to 4 with white vinegar, and use your anthocyanin pH strips to determine that. And you're going to add 33 grams of potassium alum. Very similar, gently boil for 30 minutes, filter the solids, move to your pot. Add 10 grams of potash and combine, stir gently, let settle, transfer pigment to filter paper, rinse and dry. And this is the process in photographs. There's my madder roots after they've been dried. And I would have added, again, I've added the alum and I've adjusted pH down. And then here's when I add the potash. You can see it bubbles up again quite a bit. Not as aggressively as the Weld. I'm sure chemists could explain the stoichiometry there, but I cannot. More foaming. Again, now I've got my solution that's settling out over time. Pretty low yield with what I had there, but what you're actually looking at here is a thickened paste. I had more madder than that, but not very much. I've had to be pretty stingy with it in my paintings so far. Can we take just like a 1-minute break? Let's do that.
Yeah.
I know we're kind of... All right. Hey, great. So one thing maybe I missed talking about that pigment was how I've been grinding this pigment. I mentioned the Weld lake that I eventually had to use a coffee grinder to get that. That's one method. But simply, these plant-based pigments should grind pretty easily just with a simple mortar and pestle. And if you can get it as fine here with this, you shouldn't have to do that water grading thing. No doubt, I'm just not dealing with the volume of pigment to justify doing that water grading thing. I just don't have enough. I would lose a lot in the process. I have some other tools here that I use when actually blending the pigment into the paint binder. And we're going to talk about this here in just a second, but I wanted to show these off. Both of these are called mullers, paint mullers. Just two different styles here. I bought this one originally, and I just ended up getting this one. I could probably go for a while with this, but what I ended up finding was that some paints I kind of had to lean into a little bit, and I found that this just became a little bit cumbersome over time. What you're going to do when you're mulling paint is take a little bit of your pigment and then you're going to wet it. Like you might wet it with water if you're using a water-soluble binder. Tonight we're going to talk exclusively about water-soluble binders. And I'll wet my pigment a little bit and make a little paste out of the pigment. And I'll do this on top of like a tempered glass cutting board or maybe a marble slab. I actually use a marble slab at home now. For a while, I was just using like a dinner plate and just being gentle with it. But eventually it will crack if you're leaning into it too hard. So now I've got my wetted pigment. And if I'm not really confident in my mortar and pestle grind, I might kind of pre-grind that pigment with my muller. But what you're supposed to do with the muller properly is that's for blending wetted pigment with a binder. So you take a little, like maybe a 1-to-1 ratio of pigment and binder, and blend them together with a little palette knife on your board. And then you're going to take your muller and just kind of swirl around. I'll save you my experience here because I'm certainly not as experienced in this and not really well qualified to teach it. But to learn about mulling, there are dozens of qualified teachers on YouTube that can show you that process. We need to talk about binders. Binders is the other half of the paint. We've talked a lot about pigment, but we haven't talked about binders. The simplest paints, which is what we're going to be able to talk about tonight, are just a combination of those two parts, pigment and binder. And we talked a lot about pigments. That's the colorant. That's the small little bits of colored material that are suspended in the binder. And the binder is the liquid to which those pigments are blended into. Binders are essentially adhesive liquids. They're glues. You're going to see that our binders actually double as glues. So these are dilute glues. And they dry to form those thin layers that you know is paint, and they lock in these pigments and get that continuous sheet of color is what we're going for. Today, modern chemistry gives us acrylics, all kinds of modern binders for all these different applications. Tonight, we're most interested in the homegrown DIY, make in your kitchen or source from the farm kind of locally available materials, binders. Do not be fooled that you can make some high quality stuff here. Here's an example of a few binders that I've experimented with at home. Glair is at the top. Hide glue. Gouache. I think I'm saying that right. Gouache. Haven't done enough with gouache yet, but I've got a nice jar of this in my fridge to experiment with. Egg tempera. Casein. And down at the very bottom, this is my first run with using cold pressed linseed oil. And got a lot to learn there. Tonight we're going to specifically talk about glair, hide glue, egg tempera, and casein. I'm going to do similar to what I've done with the pigments. I'm going to give you some recipes, and I'll show you some paintings where those binders have been used throughout history. Binders, you probably already know this intuitively, but there's a lot of different properties. You know, some are going to be more opaque and some are going to come out more transparent. They're going to have a different sheen. They're going to be glossy or matte or sort of velvety in between. The binders we're going to be messing with are going to be matte or maybe a little velvety like that egg tempera. Some are much easier to use than others. Drying time, for the most part, our water-based binders are pretty fast drying. They will have an effect on pigments. They possibly could. I haven't seen it yet. Some are absolutely more resilient to, say, humidity or light fastness. And of course, cost and local availability. That's all we're interested in tonight, are the locally available ones. Here's a book that I've kind of used to guide my learning here. The Painter's Handbook. This is great. It's great for somebody like me who's kind of coming in cold. According to Mark, binders should retain adhesive quality as they age and remain stable and resist cracking. They should not change color over time or cause the pigment to change color. They should not easily dissolve or, of course, be toxic. Our binders are not perfect. They're not going to be as perfect as a manufactured binder. The stuff I'm doing is next level amateur stuff. Let's say that. Here's my tools again. There's my marble slab and my tools that I've already showed you. That's where my mulling is going to take place. I don't want to skip over this too fast because this is a really important step about making sure that you're really adequately blending your pigment into your binder. And again, if I should have made a YouTube video of how I do it, but I think that you can find plenty of other better videos out there. For the most part, I'll start with 1-to-1 pigment and binder. Indigo, for example, is a very strong pigment. I can use substantially less pigment there. I might add other additives. At this point, in terms of additives, I've really only experimented with the chalk, the eggshells, and I've been able to take, certain pigments and really carry them quite a bit further by adding eggshell to them. So just again, I don't want to skip over this too fast, but specifically for two different binders that act quite a bit differently when you're blending them. Casein, milk paint. The advice is to how you know that you've got a proper ratio here. The milk paint, I can take my time. It's a little slower drying than the others. It takes water really nicely. I can thin it down nicely. You don't want to over thin it. Again, the advice is to blend a small amount and kind of paint a piece of scrap material and make sure that it's actually dry. Wait an hour or so, and then take a damp rag. And if it wipes off, then you need to use more binder. Too much binder, and you may end up with like an inconsistent sheen. You may have glossier sections and matte finish sections, and you're just going to have thin coverage. Like you'll need more. For egg tempera, you don't have a lot of time to do any mulling. Egg tempera, egg yolks, they tend to dry extremely fast, and there's not a lot of working time here. That's a case where you want to make sure that your pigments are very finely pre-ground. And then in some cases, you can just do a really quick mulling, or you can even just mix with like a palette knife. Egg tempera is going to be kind of dull and chalky if you have too much pigment. And it's going to be similar to the milk paint. It's going to wipe off. too much binder, and it's going to be very shiny. If you were to go back to that very first picture that I showed with the brick and the indigo and the ash and the bone, you would see that I was very inconsistent mixing my tempera there. There's definitely some shiny pieces and some pieces that rub off. Okay, all right, let's get into these different binders and kind of wrap up here. Glair. Glair is kind of a cool one. This is one of the easiest to make, but what I've done here is I take egg whites, so I'm separating the yolk from the egg, and whipping the egg in my blender at home. Or sorry, not blender, but I'm using just like an egg beater and whipping it like crazy. And letting that standing egg white, as it drains away, you get this yellow translucent liquid that drains to the bottom. That's glair. Glair is a kind of a similar to watercolor. It acts like watercolors, but if you go back, you can see that I've actually gotten a very nice coverage with glair up there. I was surprised how nicely I was to do that. By the way, these colors, this is the roasted clay that I was talking about, the dull red or dull roasted clay. This is pure indigo. This is my wood ash, and that's my madder lake. Just wanted to get a feel here. I made this just to get a feel for the different binders and see how they act. I was very happy with the glair, honestly. The problem is it's probably the least resilient of all of the binders that I'm going to talk about tonight. It does tend to wash away the easiest. Where I've used glair more than anything has been a sort of a protective glaze over my casein or tempera paintings. And what's nice there is that it takes my inconsistencies in sheen and kind of gives it a nice, like, velvety, consistent sheen. It's just like a varnish in that way that it gives a consistent look. It's certainly not as durable as a proper varnish, but I found it to be kind of nice for paintings that are going to stay in my home. It's not something I would want to keep in a really humid environment. Historically, glair was the binder for those illuminated manuscripts that I was talking about. Glair is only going to last about a week in the fridge, so use it up. Actually, let me backtrack. I have read of people that say it gets better with age, but it absolutely reeks after about a week in the fridge. Here's an example of a manuscript that was painted with glair. We don't know, I don't know. I wasn't able to ascertain what those pigments are, but it's quite possible that there's some matter going on in there. I don't see anything that would look like Weld. Glair would have been used for the gilding too, actually using that gold flake finish there. This is from 13th century Spain. That's very old. Egg tempera. Egg tempera is made from egg yolks, and it's a extremely quick drying paint, and it is water resistant and relatively tough. Nice velvety sheen. Ubiquitous. It's everywhere in pre-Renaissance art. It's the medium of religious, the Christian icons, and many of the 15th century and before paintings. This is Botticelli's Birth of Venus, painted with egg tempera on canvas. It is such a fast drying medium that it's unlike oil paint, and that you cannot blend it on the canvas. This is what you'll always hear. It's a difficult medium in that way, that if you actually zoom in on Venus's face here, you can see the cross-hatching pattern for blending. So difficult to get those hyper-realistic paintings that you get with oil, but unique nonetheless. I love it. I think it's so captivating.
I think I can get a zoom.
Yeah, plenty of other sources online where you can learn about cross-hatching technique. Yeah, this is where I wanted to get a video, and let me see if I can do that from here. I actually took a video at home. Is that gonna go over there?
Yeah, you have to just drag it over.
It's not letting me here. Because one thing about getting this egg tempera is the challenge is in, how's that?
Yeah. Click up.
You want to make it larger?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, my wife took this video at home and was just amazed by the weird stuff that I'm getting into. Anyway, so what I want to show you here is just the simple technique for separating the yolk. Many of you probably already know that. And then the method for making sure that you're not getting that membrane. It's a simple method, but I'll show you how I pierce the membrane and just keep what's inside the yolk. So get your yolk, and then what you want to do is dry it off, kind of roll it around. You can just use a paper towel for this, or that's actually an indigo dyed cloth right there. That's dyed with urine and indigo. Fascinating process. Okay, so there's my yolk with the membrane on it. So what I'll do is just take a spoon and then jab it with a fork, and then just kind of gently squeeze the yolk out of there. What you want to do is cut this with water. That yolk that's draining out, you want to probably do at least 1 part yolk to 1 part water. And there's the membrane. I'll just discard that membrane. Okay, I thought that was important enough to take a video of it. All right, how do I get this off my screen?
Exit.
Sorry, guys. It's down there.
Let me see if I can.
I can't see it down there.
I have to uncrop it.
Here you go.
Okay.
There we go. All right, thanks for watching my video. What's going on here? Okay.
We may have.
There we go. Okay. All right, here's another one. This is getting real weird. This was a deep dive. Hide glue. Hide glue is exactly what it sounds like. It's a glue made from animal hides and bones. This is an old glue, an ancient glue, ancient paint binder too. Not a great paint binder, but it does work. One thing about the glue is that it's very moisture sensitive, and it will actually, it can actually be a food. Like you can actually get molds growing on it, mildews, if it's stored in a humid environment. So use this, this is strictly interior. And it tends to be a little softer than the other paints that I've described here. But hide glue, I wanted to include it because, well, for one, because I did the work, and that there are painters that have used hide glue binders in their paintings. In particular, this is Rothko. This is quite a bit different than the other paintings we've showed tonight. This is Mark Rothko's Light Red Over Black from 1957. This includes, I'm just going to read this here. It's cotton duck canvas, and it's been primed with the base coat of red, red pigment. I don't know which pigment, but with rabbit skin glue. And then that rabbit skin glue is actually kind of scraped away, and then oil paints are added on top of that. So you just get these interesting contrast of finishes, and you get this depth. I know a lot of people are frustrated by this kind of art, but I've been, I understand it. I've certainly never seen one of these in person, but I understand that it has a really powerful impact if you're standing in front of it. You really do have to be in front of this. But no doubt Rothko found something fascinating with that rabbit skin glue. The hide glue is traditionally used for sizing paper. Sizing is like a technique where you're gonna dip raw paper in a really dilute glue, and it essentially just kind of, I don't want to say the word plasticizes, but it gives you an even surface to draw on. For canvas or rigid supports, it's used similar to the gesso, where it's going to work as a moisture barrier, and then also fill in little holes, give you a consistent, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, just consistent across all supports. This is most commonly used in gesso. Gesso is hide glue and chalk. That is a traditional gesso. Now I'm going to show you the process for obtaining hide glue from animal hides. But I want to start by saying that the another video series that I basically just referenced the series the entire time, from Skill Cult. I think I'm saying that right. Skill Cult. Great series. It's maybe, I don't remember, but it's over an hour long, maybe 2 hours of talking about hide glue, and he's just got it down in a way that I'm not going to be able to cover in a couple of minutes. So if you really want to take the deep dive and do it yourself, I'd recommend head on over to his channel. One example of hide glue, before I move on, used traditionally with the Native Americans, is for taking a sinew from the leg bones of certain animals or tissues. They would use that to for a variety of purposes, but then they would coat it or dip it in a hide glue to make that the sinews would form rigid after dipping in hide glue. So think tying arrowheads onto arrow shafts. For some reason, rabbit skins have traditionally been recognized as the ideal material for hide glue. And I'll say one thing before we switch over to skin and rabbits, but a suitable paint medium can also be made using gelatin sheets from the grocery store, like Knox gelatin sheets. People have done DIY gesso or paint medium just using those. So I hooked up with a rabbit farmer local to the Mills River area, and he graciously saved his hides for me for a little while. Gave me it's probably a dozen or 15 hides, and I took a few of those and made glue out of them. There's no way around this. It's a disgusting job. I guess you get used to it. It's not something, I enjoy disgusting things, but this one I still never really got used to, and I skinned quite a bit. You're going to flesh the skins. You're going to remove the little bits of flesh on the back of the hide, and you're going to wash it really well. And then you disinfect and remove hair by soaking this fleshed and cleaned hide in a lime solution. And then you're going to find that the lime is going to break off. It's going to dissolve that connection of the hair in the hide so that you can remove the hide or the hair really easy. You do need to remove the hair. You're going to rinse out the lime, and then you're going to dry it. And at this point, after you've rinsed it and dried it, you have, recognize these? These are raw hide strips. You know, another thing you could do is just go get a rawhide bone from the grocery store too, and you could start there if you want to experience this process without flushing. Take those rawhide strips and what I'm showing you here is the crock pot, but this is skins that I didn't actually take to dry, and I just stuck them directly into the crock pot. But I've cut them up into fine strips, and this takes a long time, but you're gonna gently heat these. You absolutely cannot let this boil or it's gonna lose its adhesive properties, but just gently heat it. It's gonna take overnight. It might take more than one night. It's kind of like rendering fat, if you've ever done that. It helps if you cut these up into much smaller pieces. This is the first and only time I've done this, but if I was to do this again, I would take the time and cut these up into much smaller bits. Eventually, those are going to dissolve completely, and you're going to end up with a sort of a thick solution of hide glue that you can pour out into sheets. And this is how they make gelatin sheets. And what I've done here is pour it into these glass dishes that are probably a quarter inch pour or so. I've got two of those. And here's a mistake I made. I took it and put it out in the sun to dry. And it does not take very much for that stuff to remelt. So ended up with another melted sheet of it. And with some finesse and some skill, you can get these sheets. They're very sticky when you cut them up like this. But you can get them to air dry if you rotate carefully and just be really gentle on the heat so that you don't remelt it. But eventually I ended up with this jar of hide glue. I started with a full, I think it was 3 skins, 3 actual rabbits that I did. This is just testament to my low yield, but I got 1 8-ounce jar of crushed hide glue. You can see it does make some pretty cool crystals here when it does dry. Can you kind of see that? Yeah. Pretty neat stuff. You can reconstitute this as a glue or a binder by adding alkali back to it and then gently heating it. Oh, I'm sorry. This you don't need to add alkali to. You can just add hot water to it. And depending on your consistency, you have a glue or you have a paint binder. I probably will not do this again, given that I do a lot of things that are huge undertakings for small yield, and this was a huge undertaking for a really small yield. I don't think I'll do that again. I'd much rather have some nice tanned hides than hide glue, honestly. This is the kind of thing that would have been done with the refuse of the tanning process or the butchery process. They no doubt centuries ago would have used every bit as leather that they could use and kept that. So we're talking little bits of scrap. And if you're working at scale, if you're doing a lot of tanning, then this is the kind of process you can do with your remnants, your waste. But as a backyard processor, I don't think I'll do that again. Casein is my favorite paint to work with. I said earlier that it blends really well. It's nice that it's slower drying than egg tempera, and you can do a little bit more blending. This painting right here is a painting from Thomas Hart Benton. He's an American painter known for his regionalism style, kind of a populist style of the 20th century. He's a Midwestern painter. He uses a lot of egg tempera and casein and paints on materials, that can be found on the farm. I really do appreciate that. I think that's a wonderful confluence of local materials and populist themes. This painting has some casein in it. I think it's casein and oil. So casein is the protein isolated from cow's milk. If you take defatted or skim milk, there's two main proteins, the curds and the whey. Casein is made from the curds. And you can get those curds by intentionally spoiling the milk. I mean, you can set the milk out at room temperature, or you can add, say, like lemon juice and facilitate that curdling. That's what I do, or vinegar. And take your curds, and then you rinse them. You get that vinegar out after it's curdled, and then dry those curds. And that's just a jar of the first batch of casein that I made. And I want to explain that this was a huge mistake to have these huge chunks of casein. I don't have a way to grind this. I just don't know how I would do that. If I take it in the mortar and pestle and I try to mash this down into smaller bits, it's absolutely, it's wild how much kinetic energy is in this thing. It will literally explode. Anyway, so if you're going to go making casein, just break it up into finest bits before you go to dry it. Again, of all the binders I've talked about, glair, hide glue, tempera, casein, in my experience, has been the toughest. It's not uncommon for casein paint to be used on furniture or interior walls. In that way, it's probably the most scalable and practical for DIY jobs. You're not going to paint your living room with egg yolks. Certainly not rabbit skin. Casein is more widely known as milk paint, so I'm sure you've heard of milk paint. Made from milk curds, rinsed and dried milk curds. How we're going to get paint or glue out of this is we're going to take this dried curds and we're going to add an alkali and we're going to add some hot water. Many different alkali choices that we can use. They're all going to have different properties in the end. Ammonium carbonate is the historical choice for making artist grade casein paint. I believe that. Most of the recipes that you can find are going to call for ammonium carbonate if you're trying to do fine art painting. That's something I could not source at home. Ultimately, I cheated and I'm using borax from the grocery store. I do believe that I could use my potash. Probably. I've experimented with lye, like actually sodium hydroxide. That's obviously too strong. Pickling lime might even work too. My eggshell lime. I just haven't experimented enough to try those. But the borax is said to, is to make it quite a bit tougher. And ideally, I want to work towards having something that I can paint furniture with. Here's another Thomas Hart Benton. This is called The Flood. This is casein and oil on linen. So this is linen affixed to a board, so a linen fabric. Making casein. Here's my recipe. I've got a gallon of skim milk. Heat it, and then I add about 2 cups of vinegar to that milk, and then settle. Let that milk just let it be, and then I strain. They call it the quark. That's the curds there. You're going to rinse the quark, and then break it into really small bits before you go to dry it. Dry casein will store for indefinitely. If I want to use it for immediately, I won't dry it at all. I'll just use it, and I find that rehydrating this stuff is probably the hardest part. It might take overnight in the fridge. It may take 2 days to rehydrate it. That's really why I want to have it ground so fine, is that it'll rehydrate quicker. In order for me to use it immediately, I'll take my cork, my non-dried curds, and I'll add 2 cups of warm distilled water to that 1 gallon. This is originally starting with 1 gallon of milk. I'll add that 2 cups of warm distilled water to it and about 8 teaspoons of borax. And then I'll stir, and then again, I have to let that, I have to let it kind of meld together in there. It takes a few hours. You can speed it up by heat, but again, you don't want to overheat this, or you'll start to lose its adhesive qualities. I should say I use a stick blender to heat it up. That was something that I found was really helpful. Just a little tip when using this. This is my drying casein, my little bits that I've broken apart. Again, I just find it's wildly easier to reconstitute if it's in smaller pieces. And it's very hard to take these chunks and break them into small pieces. Total yield is about 6 ounces of dried casein bits from 1 gallon of skim milk. And that will reconstitute to about 3 cups of glue. This photo is glue consistency. I would want to dilute that at least 50% with water before using it as a paint binder, maybe even more than that. Again, you have a decent working time when you're blending in your pigments. That's it for the 4 main paint binders that I've been working with, and I think that you can work with without much effort. I think you can hit the ground running with some beautiful art using these homemade materials and homegrown pigments and locally sourced earth pigments and bones and eggshells and whatever else you want to throw in there, wood ash. I want to take just a minute. I know I'm going over time. I don't know if anybody's left, but I want to just show what I've started to do with drying oils. We're talking about oil mediums now. These are linseed. What's shown here is cold pressed linseed oil from ultimately these are flax seeds that I just bought in the store, but I did grow a plot of flax on my home garden. It's just going to be achingly small yield, probably not worth processing. And this is black walnut oil that I pressed from black walnuts collected around our property as well. It takes a lot of walnuts to get that much oil, and it's a lot of work cracking those. One of those things I don't know if I'll ever do again now that I know, but I don't have much to say about refining these yet, but there is a process where you can take, let me backtrack. Drying oils are these specific seed and nut oils. Linseed, walnut, safflower, and poppy are among the most popular drying oils. I think I've got this right, they're the unsaturated oils that tend to oxidize, and when they oxidize, they don't just go rancid, they actually polymerize into this tough film. Linseed oil is predominantly the most famous of these oils, most widely used. Linseed oil is what they made linoleum out of. A lot of people don't know that, but linoleum is not, it is a natural product. And it's basically linseed oil and fillers like cork or charcoal or sawdust. But what's unique about the drying oils, they do take a long time to dry, so you can blend on the canvas and get those really beautiful, realistic paintings. One thing you do want to do is refine the oil in some way or another. There is a YouTube video by a man called Joe Besh, and there's a link at the end of this presentation, but he's got a really nicely well done video on how to use silica sand and water to remove the mucilage out of both of these oils. And by doing that, what you end up with is a clear, drying linseed oil. Linseed does tend to yellow over time. Removing the mucilage will help from that. And it tends to help with cracking later on too. And then it has to sun dry. Again, that process is detailed on his video. If you're like me, you're looking for a source of silica sand that's nearby. And as it turns out, it does need to be silica sand. And I found that a pool filter is the place to get that. So I've been waiting. These oils have been sitting in the back of my fridge since probably April. And I've been waiting to source that pool filter sand from my friend down the road when they clean out their pool. It's about now. So now's the time to be tracking that down. A lot more to learn here, but last thing I want to show you is my rig for cold pressing seeds. This is a cold expeller. It's not entirely cold. What you normally see these kind of expellers, I forget the brand name of the one that's made, I think in Holland. Yeah, I don't remember. Is that Finland maybe? But it's basically the knockoff version of that. I'm sorry, but it's $100 cheaper. And I'm just in such an experimental mode here that I didn't want to invest any more on that. What I've done is remove the candle that's normally sitting in the bottom of this thing and added a electric band heater on a PID controller. This upgrade, I probably have $40 invested in the upgrade, but I get very fine temperature control. I'm not overheating at all. I don't have to worry about the open flame or anything that comes with that. I've found that it's really the ticket to making this work. It's challenging. I was challenged a lot on how to make this work for walnuts and to make it work for linseed or flax seeds. Eventually I did, I got that yield that I showed you there. Quite a bit left over in the nut, I believe, in the cake. Nonetheless, here's a picture of that process and how sloppy it tends to get. Anyway, that's my personal frontier. How can I take these oil paintings or this cold pressed oil and refine my own painting? I actually have plenty of personal frontiers here, and if you followed me along this far, I'd love to hear where you want to go with this. But personally, I want a better understanding of the oil refining process. I want to know how my pH of my paint. I know that when I start throwing in wood ash or my calcium oxide, that I'm dramatically affecting pH of my pigments and my binders. I want to know the effect of that paint on the wood, or over time if it's going to affect colors. I want to get away from plywood entirely, but right now it's just too easy to work with. We do have a sawmill on the farm now. I'm hoping to engage in some of our own milled wood. I'd like to experience with fresco painting with my eggshell lime, some of the alternative resins, and get into this beeswax painting. And of course, I'd love to learn about DIY paper. That's something I haven't been able to touch on. And then maybe that's a place to use my hide glue. So again, I'd love to hear what you plan to do if you made it this far. It must mean that you're interested in something. Please share. Please send me an email if you'd like. It's lwfbiochar@gmail.com is the easiest way to reach me. Last thing, I do have some references up here. We'll take this presentation and upload it on the website so you can find it there, archived workshop handouts, livingwebfarms.org. Check out the blog if you want to. I just wrote something about the plant pigments, so if you just want to isolate that part of this workshop, I would understand. I've got the recipes and the process described there. It's called Primary Palette, livingwebfarms.org. Thanks, everybody. Nice talking to you.
We have questions?
Not really. We'll take one more time here
All right.
on the second. No, this is the master class. Thank you so much.
Woo.